Prefix. These are records found detailing the era known as the end. Listen in any order. Record 1. I walked the boardwalk with Jess. We have been engaged for 2 weeks, and we both took this Friday off to spend an extra long weekend together on a beach trip to celebrate. I was so happy she had said yes. We have been together for 2 years, and I was swimming in the joy of imagining our life together. It was like being in a bubble of happiness. At the time, I wish I knew it wouldn't last. I wish. That's getting ahead. I'm not recording this in hopes of getting help, but only as a record for whoever finds this device. We walked the boardwalk, hand in hand, both looking at all the fun and colorful shops lining the pathway, bathed in the bright summer sun. Hey Troy, let's check out some of these shops. I've never actually gone in one. Her voice was like soft music to me. I wonder if she was feeling the same euphoria as me. Yeah, let's check them out. I've always found this stuff kind of interesting. We walked and chatted until we came upon the first shop. It was a souvenir and toy shop, full of kids' toys and appropriately themed beach souvenirs. You know the type, full of rocks that were found on the beach, postcards, and shark tooth necklaces. Your standard souvenir shop. The toys were neat too. We walked the aisle looking at the various stuffed aquatic creatures made out of bright colorful fabric, and all the sand toys and kite flying equipment you could ever need. It was a neat store, but we soon decided to move on without buying anything. The next shop we came upon was painted maroon and had a badly hand-painted Popeye the Sailor Man painted on the door. The sign above the door read, Auntie Anne's Antiques, in what you could tell was once gold-colored cursive lettering, but was rusted and aged due to the salt in the air. Let's go in. Jessie's eyes lit up, and she practically dragged me in with her. This shop was packed with oddities. Bare-boned metal shelves and clearly old glass cases holding tons of meticulously arranged objects covered the entire store, leaving only just room enough to walk around and look. Everything had a small white tag on it with a handwritten price. There was pottery, metal sculptures, and an overabundance of old rotodial phones dotted the shop. There were crystals and old jewelry, and old decayed wooden objects whose purpose I could not discern. Truly, it was all rather fascinating. I found an old K-bar knife that I really liked. I examined the dark-aged steel of the blade and the worn leather handle. It would cost me a cool $50, but I had saved a decent chunk of money for this trip, so I figured I could treat myself. Hey babe, check out this knife I found. I think it's pretty neat. I'm going to buy it. I said to Jess, who was about 5 feet away examining the rocks and crystals. Yeah, get your boy stuff. But if you're getting something, I'm getting something too. She held up a black crystal. It was the length and thickness of an empty paper towel roll and rested in a plain metal base. Look, you think it's just a black crystal, right? I raised an eyebrow at her. Then she held it in the sunlight coming through a nearby window, and it was revealed that the crystal was actually a dark red. The sunlight going through it sent rays of deep red light onto the floor and walls. I think I will put it in our window to catch the sunlight. I admit, that is pretty cool. Yeah, let's get it. The tag on the crystal read, $30. A little pricey for a fancy rock, but whatever. I was buying a knife that was who knows how old. We went to check out, and a lady looking to be in her mid-40s greeted us. You must be Auntie Anne. You have such a cool store. I said to her. She laughed gently as she took the knife and stone from me and Jess. Oh no, Auntie Anne was my great-grandmother. She opened this shop 60 years ago. She looked me in the eye, then tapped her name tag, which clearly read, Claire. I felt my face flush a bit. How embarrassing. How had I missed that? I heard Jess stifle a giggle and turn her head away. I handed Claire the money and took the knife. Claire held the crystal out to me, and I tried to take it too. But Claire wouldn't let go. I pulled a little harder, but she had an iron grip on it. I looked at her, but her eyes were focused on the crystal. "Claire?" I questioned. Suddenly, she looked up at me and released the crystal. "Oh, I'm sorry. This piece has been with the family since we opened. I'm just a little sad to see it go. I am sure it will find better use in your home than wasting away on these shelves though. You have a good day now." And with that, she walked into the back room of the shop. Jess made a circular motion around the side of her head with her pointer finger, indicating that the lady must be psycho. After spending the rest of the weekend wandering the tourist beach town and enjoying the sun and sand, we decided to return home. I put the knife into the drawer of the nightstand on my side of the bed, and she placed the crystal in the windowsill where it could catch the most sunlight. Life seemed to normal for a few weeks, working, cooking, and doing all the stuff that a newly engaged couple does. I woke up to light directly in my eyes. I squinted and realized the crystal was refracting the morning sun directly into my eyes in its signature shade of red. It was like looking at the sun through red-tinted sunglasses. It was shaded, but the sun was still the sun, and it hurt. I rolled over and decided to go back to sleep for just a few more minutes. I was falling. It was dark. I screamed, but my voice just seemed to disappear, like there was nothing to carry it. Suddenly, I was no longer falling, but floating in this infinite abyss. I looked around and saw nothing. I attempted to move, but with nothing to push off of, I was wiggling helplessly. And suddenly, I heard it. I heard it and felt it at the same time. A deep rumbling, changing in pitch and tone in ways a human cannot. It vibrated through my entire body and assailed my ears. As I listened, though, I realized it was a voice. And although it was not speaking English, I could understand it. I could see no source for it, but I knew it was in this void with me. Or rather, I was in this void with it.
Human.
It rumbled agonizingly slow. I attempted to speak, but as I opened my mouth, it was forced shut by an unseen force. The voice rumbled again.
You have been chosen.
I struggled against the force in an attempt to speak, and it responded by restricting the movement of my entire body. It was as if I was being crushed from all directions. I couldn't even breathe. Panic and claustrophobia welled up inside me. From the abyss, a long dark red tentacle seemed to appear from nowhere and stretched towards me. There was nothing I could do. I could not move. I could not breathe or thrash. I could only watch. The tentacle stopped in front of my face. It moved to touch the center of my forehead. Ice cold waves shot through my body. And then, I was in a convenience store. I tried to move, but could not. I watched from behind a shelf of goods as a ski-masked robber pointed a gun at the clerk. But it wasn't me moving. In the window reflection, I saw that it was me, but this body was moving of its own accord. I was just looking through its eyes. I saw myself lift a hand up towards the man and watched as his gun seemed to just fly out of his hands and into mine. The robber looked terrified. Suddenly, I am back in my apartment, but still not in control. I am removing the cap from a gallon of milk when I drop the cap on the ground and rolls under the fridge. I feel myself take a sharp breath of frustration and bend down to look under the fridge. The cap has rolled clear to the back. I open my palm, and the cap wistfully flies into it. I am floating back in the void. The tentacle is receding back into the depths of the black. My body rumbles violently with the impact of its voice.
Use it as you will.
And then, my eyes open, and I am back in my bed. I can feel myself covered in sweat, but I am freezing cold. Jess is sleeping peacefully next to me. What the hell just happened? Did I just have a night terror? That was an oddly specific and memorable night terror. I rolled over and looked at the crystal. The light ray was now about a foot above my head. I must have been out about 30 to 40 minutes. I had seen too many sci-fi and fantasy movies to discount what had just happened to me. I recalled the strange vision I was shown. I was chosen? Use it wisely? I sat up in excitement, not really believing what I was thinking. Was I given superpowers? I scoffed to myself, but noticed the TV remote on the dresser at the far end of the room. I double-checked to make sure Jess was still asleep, so I wouldn't make a fool of myself. And then, held a hand out to the remote. I willed it to me. Nothing happened. I laughed in my mind at the absurdity of it, and decided to try one more time. With all of my mental energy, I willed the remote into my hand, thought of nothing but the remote coming to me. And then, it flew at breakneck speed into my hand. The back of the remote slammed into my hand with a loud slap, and fell into my lap. I winced in pain and held my hand. It worked. Oh my god, it worked. I looked up at the crystal with excitement. Today was Saturday, so no work. I decided I was going to test this ability more. I needed to know what I was capable of, what were the limits, and what might happen if I overdid it. I told Jess me and the boys were going out shooting. I grabbed my Walther PPQ 45 pistol and ammunition and headed out the door. I drove about 45 minutes out into the forest area outside of town. I found an old service road leading to an empty lot that was once used to stage trees from loggers. I parked my car in the road at the entrance to the third lot so no one could surprise me. I placed a large, fist-sized rock on the ground in front of me. I looked at it and held out a hand and willed it to float at eye level in front of me, wary of willing it to move too fast and hurt me like the remote had. It wiggled slightly, then lifted up and held itself exactly where I wanted it. I made it move in circles, transfixed by what I was able to do. I then looked at a nearby tree, and with a sudden burst of thought, demanded that the rock launch itself at the tree. The rock listened and exploded towards the tree faster than I could see. There was a loud thunk, and the entire tree vibrated. I examined the spot of the impact and found the rock lodged about 7 or 8 inches into the trunk. Next, I decided to mess with my gun. I took the unloaded pistol and placed it on the ground. I willed it into the air in front of me. I kept it there as I loaded a single round into the clip. I held the clip out and let it float out of my hand and into the gun. I was glad to know I had some fine motor control. I aimed it at the same tree and willed the trigger back. It fired. I fell to my knees, and the gun fell too. I had real powers. I spent the next few weeks using it only for nominal tasks. I didn't want to tell Jess until I had full knowledge over what I had attained. I used it to pour my coffee, to load my clothes into the washer and dryer. At work, I practiced fine control by using it to type and write. After about 2 months had passed, I had decided to tell Jess, but was deciding how to go about it when an opportunity presented itself.
Troy?
I heard her call from the kitchen. Can you come help me? I walked in and found her looking under the fridge. I recalled the vision I had been shown of retrieving the milk cap from under the fridge. "Yeah, what's up? Did you drop something under there?" "No, but the water line is leaking. Can you pull the fridge out for me so we can get a closer look?" What a perfect opportunity. "Jess, there's something really good I need to tell you. But let me just show you instead." She gave me a strange look. "Okay, sure, go for it, I guess," she said with uncertainty. I nodded and looked at the fridge. I closed my eyes and held out a hand to it. This was my first time moving something this large, but I knew I could do it. I called for it to move out. I felt the familiar rush and the release of the power. And then nothing. The fridge did not move. The ability did not come. I heard Jess release a blood-curdling screech from the living room. She was just right next to me. How? I raced to the living room and found her pinned to the wall by an invisible force. This was our apartment, but everything was suddenly different. A melancholy shade of red lit everything. All the furniture and walls, the floor, and the paint itself all looked as though they had aged 100 years. Bright red vines covered in thorns grew over everything. Jess screamed and started crying. "Troy, help me!" She sobbed, with tears rolling down her face. "It hurts. Oh my god, it hurts. Troy, please, it hurts." Her back arched, and her voice became nothing but sobs and incoherent ramblings. The tears continued to pour down her face, and her eyes rolled back in her head. I rushed to her in an attempt to pull her down, panic overtaking my emotions. The moment I made contact with her, I was thrown onto the opposite wall and held by what I assumed was the same unseen force. The wails coming from Jess brought tears to my eyes as I watched her begin to convulse violently. Blood started to trickle from her mouth, and her wails became high-pitched gurgles. A small line appeared vertically in the center of her face. I watched, horrified, as the slit moved from her forehead to her neck. I realized with terror it was a cut. The slit began to open, and blood dripped out as the skin seemed to peel itself from her head. I struggled to get down, to help her, to do anything. Her body continued to skin itself, and I could do nothing as I watched the muscle and sinew became exposed while listening to the sounds she was making. I didn't even know humans could make sounds like this. I willed the power to come. With everything that I had, I demanded that it release me. I felt it welling up within me. I felt hope. I released the power in a startling display of fury. And then, it was gone, winked out of existence. Jess's skin peeled itself the rest of the way off, revealing glistening muscle, blood, and sinew. Her cuts fell to the floor, their own weight causing them to rip and tear out of her. She stopped moving. Tears fell from my face without restraint. My body rumbled. I heard a familiar, deep, and eldritch voice. It was laughter. "So, what did you want to show me?" Jess asked, confused. I was standing there with my arm outstretched towards the fridge like an idiot. I looked around, still panicked and terrified. Everything was back to normal. Never mind. Let me just move the fridge out for you." I didn't use the power again for months. I was terrified by the very idea of it. The vision of Jess being skinned alive and the unnerving sounds that she had made were forever burnt into my memory. We had decided to take a trip to my parents' place for a weekend. It had been a while since I had seen them. It had been 4 months since the horrific vision had occurred, and I was only just now beginning to let it go. My mother rushed down the steps of her deck and gave me a hug. "Welcome home, Troy. I have missed you, my little man." Jess giggled. My face flushed, but I let it slide. I loved my mom, and her embarrassing names was something she had always done. But I loved that too. "Good to see you again," came my father's gruff voice. He patted my back roughly and gave me a firm handshake. My mother greeted Jess with a hug, and my father gave her a back pat as well, albeit a little gentler than the one I had received. My parents had lakeside property with a dock in their backyard. They owned a decent-sized rowboat, and we decided to take it out for a family fishing trip. We were out for about 4 hours that morning and had managed to catch 3 steelhead. They were decent size, and my mom and dad said they would cook them up for dinner. Me and Jess decided we wanted to spend a little more time on the water, so my parents headed back in before us. We sat on the end of the dock with our feet in the water, enjoying the atmosphere. After a while, we decided to go back in, lest my parents think we were doing unsavory things. A 10-foot ramp with no railing connected the dock to the shore. Jessie went up in front of me. At the top of the dock, she lost her balance, started falling right for the water. I wouldn't be able to catch her in time. Without thinking, I summoned the power and caught her and helped her regain her balance. "That was close," she exclaimed, none the wiser that she would have gone over if not for my ability. I looked at my hand as we walked back, wondering what this power actually was. That night, we had an excellent fish dinner. We returned home on Sunday night after a weekend filled with wholesome, heart-filling family time. I had a difficult time falling asleep that night. After a few hours of tossing and turning though, I was finally able to drift off. I woke up in the spare room at my parents' house. I felt my blood run cold. The room was lit in red. Bright red thorn vines covered the walls and floor. The bed I had laid in was covered in mold, falling apart, and smelled of rancid wood rot. I quickly jumped out of the bed in disgust and looked out the window. The outside world seemed to carry the same look. The sky lit bright red with a white sun. The ground was barren, devoid of life. Dead trees pocked the land. The dock was almost rotted away and sat on the floor of the dried-up lake. I knew why I was here. I had used my power. I heard a loud thump from the room above me. That was my parents' room. I rushed out and up the stairs and burst into the room. The sight that I beheld caused me to fall to my hands and knees and vomit. My parents were laying in their bed. Both of them had all 4 limbs cut completely off. The limbs were all sitting next to where they should be attached, giving the illusion that you could just move them an inch or so to reattach them. Neither of them had eyes in their sockets, just bloody gaping holes. I noticed they each held their eyes in their hands. I could see the skin under their fingernails and the blood on their hands. They had ripped out their own eyes. Tears streamed down my face. Why was this happening to me? Why did I have to see something so horrific again?
Where are you?
I demanded into the air.
Why are you doing this?
I called out boldly. I was replied to with that same infinite voice. That same violent vibration. The laughter of the one from the void. Once again, I woke in my own bed covered in sweat. I was done with this. I sat up and walked to the window and grabbed the crystal, determined to end this. I looked into it and slammed my power into it. I don't know what I was hoping for, but it worked. I found myself falling into the same void as before. I found that suddenly I was floating in the void again as well. But this time, it was different. I could feel the presence of whomever I was in here with. I used the abilities to fly towards it as fast as I could. Eventually, I came upon what I was looking for. Dark red mist, the same shade of that as the crystal, as far as the eye could see. Occasionally, red lightning bolts lit the mist, exposing the silhouette of what lay beyond. Tentacles, larger than mountains covered in suction cups the size of cities, writhed within the mist. With each lightning bolt, the awe-inspiring scale of this being was revealed. My body shook as it communicated to me. I had to struggle to maintain my grasp on my consciousness.
I am done with you.
I saw the same tentacle that had bestowed this power to me before. I was gripped by the force of this being, my ability but a speck of dust by comparison to its power. I could not escape. The tentacle touched my forehead in the same spot as before. I was in my body, watching as I practiced my first time using the power. I lifted the rock and saw a small sliver of light appear in the black void of space above the earth. I threw the rock at the tree. The sliver grew larger. I lifted my gun. The sliver grew larger. I shot the gun. The sliver grew larger, and light poured through angrily. I observed with growing terror as I watched each time I used my power, the light growing into a large white circular form. And then, I watched, almost as if in slow motion, as Jess fell over on the dock and I saved her. The light became a perfect circle, and calmed and dimmed, leaving a perfect white circle. Dark red tentacles larger than mountain ranges began to slither through from the other side, hungrily making their way towards the earth. I was awakened by my phone ringing. Jess answered it. Her face went pale, and she passed the phone to me. It was the cops of my parents' town. They had been murdered in their home. The cop said it was the most gruesome murder case he had ever worked. After forensics had been done, it was found that they had not ripped their own eyes out, but each other's. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in constant fear that vision I saw of Jess would come true. I constantly checked on her. She told me she understood that I was scared after what happened to my parents, but she couldn't take me babysitting her like a child. I decided to get rid of the crystal. As I had figured would happen, I couldn't destroy it, not even with my gun. I took it deep into the woods and buried it 6 feet into the ground in a spot well away from any trail. I planted a fern on top of it to disguise the place of burial forever, and told myself I would never go back. My drive home was filled with nothing but sorrow from the death of my parents. I got home relieved to be done with the damned crystal and opened my front door. I leaned down and took my shoes off and noted the smell of rust in the air. I stood up and went frigid. Not rust, blood. My mind broke. Jess sat slumped on the couch. I laughed. I laughed hysterically, so hard my ribs hurt. I walked over to her and stroked her glistening forehead. "You forgot to put your skin on, honey," I cooed lovingly to her. I laughed as I shakily scooped her viscera back into her chest and stomach cavity. "Don't worry," I whispered to her, barely audible. "You are going to be fine." I couldn't get her guts to stay inside. So, after a few minutes, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. I looked up at the sun and noticed it looks more white than yellow today. Large snake-like shadows writhed over it, causing the light of day to darken and brighten dramatically. I noticed other people looking up as well with squinted eyes, trying to see what was causing the strange phenomena. I put my hand on the railing of the front porch and felt something prick me. I looked. It was a bright red vine. Record 2. The final days. I squinted up at the sky, coffee in hand, and shivered from the cold morning air. I was not the only one outside that morning. People were standing on porches and in yards. Cars stopped in the road, and the driver stepped out for a better look. The sky was darkening and lighting at seemingly random intervals, and not just by a little bit. It was as if night and day were happening every couple of minutes. There was something on the sun. We could make out a large slithering silhouette, but that was it. There was no eclipse or otherwise. After straining my eyes for a few minutes, I decided to step back inside to see if the news had anything to say about this. Local police say not to worry, as whatever is causing this darkness is not a threat. This is a developing story, and we will keep you updated with the latest info. So basically, no one had any idea of what was happening. Great. Well, whatever. As long as it doesn't directly affect me, I'll just go about my days as normal. I didn't have to be at work until noon, and I hoped that everything would blow over by then. At a minimum, traffic should have cleared up. I really didn't want to interact with anyone. People had a way of getting really unpredictable in situations like this. Ever read some of those horror stories about people during an eclipse? This was twice as bad. No thanks. I decided to watch Netflix to pass the time. I was up now anyways, and there was no sense in sitting in boredom. The light outside was still unstable around 11 AM when I decided to get ready for work. It gave the world a very foreboding feeling, as if something terrible was about to happen. I left for work about 30 minutes later. Although everyone was still freaking out, and rightly so, traffic was at least moving. I spent my days filling out reports and filling away papers. Clerical office work was unbearably boring. But, with a degree in both business and IT in my city, you can get way overpaid for the work you are actually doing. And I was milking that. I got home around 8:30 that night. I was glad it was nighttime as the light was no longer shifting, so people weren't absently standing outside, staring at the sky in bewilderment. I got home and threw a TV dinner in the microwave. When it finished, I walked to the couch, swapping the hot TV dinner between my hands constantly to avoid being burned. I should have just let it cool down, but I am lazy and wanted to sit down. I switched the news on to see if there were any updates after the hours I spent at work. In other news, a local man has been arrested on suspicion of skinning his fiancée alive in their apartment. The man has no past criminal record. More on this story as details emerge. This has been Como News, Seattle. People are sick. Gotta be way more careful who you associate with anymore. The only other real information I could find were close-ups of the shadows over the sun, and the anchor people talking about safety and the importance of avoiding panic. So still, no one knew anything. The next morning, things got even stranger. I stepped outside with my morning coffee and noticed a strange weed in my front yard. Some sort of red vine with thorns had grown up from the sewer grate over the sidewalk and onto my yard. It was about halfway across my yard. I tried to recall if it was there yesterday, but could not remember. I pulled the vine up all the way to the grate and snapped it. I put it into my yard disposal bin and decided to take a walk around the block to get myself going. I noticed this strange vine everywhere. It was growing in the street, on the sidewalk, and making its way up the side of a few houses. Was this some kind of invasive species? I pictured the joy in one of my friend's eyes as he would finally have a real reason to use his boring company, not a flamethrower, which was definitely a flamethrower. As I turned the corner, I observed Old Man Benjamin in his front yard, picking a red thorn vine that had grown onto his front porch. He looked to be about in his 70s, in a white comb-over, and wore large, thick, bifocal glasses. "Morning, Benji," I called out to him. "Oh, good morning, Danny," he called back. "I see you and everyone else are dealing with this vine as well." I stopped and helped him pull the vine off his porch. "I wonder if it has anything to do with the strange things happening with the sun." "All we can do is pray. There are too many strange going-ons for this to be a coincidence." I found myself agreeing with him, causing my senses to be extra perceptive for the remainder of my walk. When I returned home, I found that the vine had already grown back up to the sewer grate and onto the sidewalk. This plant was growing so fast I was starting to become a little freaked out. I let it rest in the back of my mind for now, as there was nothing I could do except observe. I went to work as normal that afternoon and returned home. I used my phone flashlight to look for the vine. I found that it had grown across the sidewalk and was now touching my grass again. I once again pulled it as far back as I could and went inside to sleep. I woke the next day to my alarm. Something felt a little off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Like that feeling when it snows and something feels different, but you can't tell what it is until you actually look outside and see the snow. I prepared my coffee and turned on the morning news as per my usual ritual. This channel is currently out of service. Okay, I'll try another one. Out of service. I tried another. Out of service. Every single channel was out of service. Were we experiencing an outage? I thought of Benji. Too much going on for this to be a coincidence. I grabbed my coffee and stepped outside, hoping to discuss this with the old man. I now knew why the TV was out. Red thorn vines grew on everything. They carpeted the street and sidewalks as well as the yards. I took an experimental step onto the vines, half expecting them to coil around me. There was no such reaction. The world looked like some sort of red horrorscape. I quelled the feeling of panic that was starting to well up inside of me. I looked at the side of my house and saw that the vines had caused my cable dish to bend and point towards the ground. I left my coffee on the railing and jogged at a fast pace to Benji's place. I found him outside, soaking wet in sweat and ripping vines up frantically. "Benji, are you okay?" I slowed my jog as I approached him. Benji whispered something and ignored me. "Old man Benji?" I said to him. He stopped moving and then slowly looked at me as he stood up. He had a gardening pick in one hand and a fistful of vines on the other. Benji dropped the vines and placed a hand on my shoulder, leaning in until his lips almost touched my ear. "He is coming," Benji whispered. "He is coming, he is coming, he is coming, he is coming," Benji whispered into my ear, talking as fast as his tongue would allow. "Benji, calm down. Talk to me. Who is coming?" I asked. Instead of answering, Benji looked up. I followed suit. This was the first time I had looked at the sky since the daylight phenomena had stopped. The panic clawed its way back. Large, thick shadows, shaped like winding rivers, streaked across the sky in every direction as far as the eye could see, stemming from a single epicenter. Benji fell to his knees, and, in a resounding voice full of terror and awe, announced for all to hear, "We are delivered." He brought the point of his gardening pick into his neck, piercing his windpipe and jugular. Blood squirted in tandem with his heartbeat. I attempted to call 911, but had no service. I had no idea how to help him. And soon, his breathing stopped. I checked his pulse and found none. If I was scared before, I was terrified now. I decided it was time to skip town. If the cops followed me for being part of Benji's death, I would willingly submit to them and tell them what I saw. But for now, I was scared to be here. I rushed home and gathered some non-perishables and water and got into my car. I was relieved when it started without an issue, and I made my way onto the road. As I drove, I kept looking at the thing in the sky. Its scale was quite literally out of this world. Somehow, whatever this thing was, the red vines and Benji's sudden shift in behavior had to be connected. As I drove through town towards the exit to the highway, I noticed many strange and macabre sights. I saw a man hanging by the neck from a flagpole in his yard. I witnessed a lady holding her unmoving infant child at her side by its ankle. I saw a large amount of homeless men standing around a barrel fire under a bridge. I watched with abject terror as they pulled a charred black corpse from the fire, and another man willingly stepped in, unfazed by the flame. I jumped in terror as a lady jumped in front of my car. I hit her at 45 miles per hour. I felt every bump as my tires eviscerated her body. I held my breath, but refused to stop. The world seemed to be getting crazier by the minute, and I refused to become a victim. At long last, I reached the exit to the highway. The vines were not as thick here. I could see some of the road below. I decided to drive east to get as far away from here as possible. After about 2 hours of driving, the vines were completely gone. They had gradually become thinner as I drove away from Seattle. I drove for a little longer and was coming up on Spokane when I noticed a police blockade. I slowed to a stop at the check station. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the car and put your hands on your head." I noticed several nervous-looking officers, some with their hands resting on their weapons. I stepped slowly from the car and put my hands on my head. "Sir, have you been in contact with any type of red thorn vine?" he asked. "Yeah, I came from Seattle. The entire place is covered in it. It was like it appeared overnight. Then everyone went crazy and started killing themselves. It was insane." I tried my best to explain. The cops shared a nervous glance. "Have you seen any flowers growing on these vines?" he questioned. "No, officer. Only the vines themselves." They let out a collective sigh. "All right. We're going to let you through. Head to the city center. There is a shelter set up. There are around 200,000 people in the city and another couple thousand evacuees. Do not attempt to leave the city unless an evacuation is announced. If you do, we cannot protect you." I nodded in agreement, and he continued. "So far as we know, some of these vines grow flowers. The pollen will cause your behavior to become sporadic and violent. If you see one, it is probably too late." I thanked the officer for the info and headed towards the city center. The shelter provided a blanket and some food and water. I was there for about 2 days when the evacuation was announced. I was not entirely surprised. The vine had overtaken Seattle in a matter of days. I was already prepared to be one of the first ones out. We were instructed to head east through Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and to the next shelter in Missoula, Montana. I thought I would be the first out, but it seems everyone was not as dumb as I assumed, and I soon found myself stuck in traffic. Overhead, I watched as at least 10 jets blasted by, flying towards Seattle. Then, we heard the loud deep booms and felt vibrations in the earth. They were dropping bombs. This threat was serious enough that they were bombing it, and we were close enough that we could feel the impact. My heels started tapping of its own accord as I became anxious and impatient to get out of here. I decided to step out of my car to see if I could see the holdup. I wasn't the only one with this idea. Ahead was a group of people in a commotion. I was struggling to see what was going on when I heard 2 gunshots ring out. The group all ducked down in fear and was soon followed by the police telling everyone to return to their cars and continue the evacuation. As I drove by the spot of the commotion, I saw the cops dragging a body. There were small tentacles about a foot in length protruding from the man's eyes. Again, traffic stopped. But this time, the reasoning was obvious. The city of Coeur d'Alene was carpeted in vine, the same as Seattle. The cops were huddled together. They seemed to be trying to figure out what to do. We numbered around 210,000 people, with about 60,000 cars. We could not move as a group east or west. We had no roads to go north or south without driving into an infested area. The cops finally decided that we would drive through the city and then head south. We were instructed to turn any air intake off, shut our vents, and hope for the best. As we received our directions though, the wind picked up, and the giant shapes in the sky began to move. We all stood mesmerized as we watched what appeared to be a giant tentacle descend from the sky. Its circumference was larger than the city below, and it sent mighty shock waves through the ground that knocked us to our knees as it crushed the city below its might.
Behind us too!
I heard somebody yell. I looked towards Seattle, and even from an entire state over, we could see as another one of those monstrosities descended past the horizon, presumably crushing Seattle as well. Dumbfounded and unsure what to do, we observed as red mist seemed to pour from the now still tentacle that was quite literally taller than the sky. Behind us, the air on the horizon turned red as well. As the mist approached, people screamed and ran north or south randomly, any direction to escape certain doom. I joined as well. There was nothing else to be done. I ran south into the forest as fast as I could. I was out of shape. I could not run for long. After about 5 minutes I was winded, and so were hundreds of other people around me. We kept walking, hoping to avoid whatever that mist was. But we were not fast enough. I heard a scream and could see the mist approaching through the trees. I saw it envelop the first person. His eyes immediately turned cherry red as they filled with blood. He fell to his knees, and a tentacle burst from his mouth. I looked away and kept running. My energy seemed to have returned. I was firing on all cylinders. Thanks, adrenaline. I heard people falling around me as the mist grew closer. I could see its blood-red tint in my peripherals. It was rolling through the air, moving faster than I could hope to escape. And then, it was upon me. I held my breath as long as possible, but eventually had to grasp for air. I covered my mouth with my shirt in a vain attempt to filter the air. I felt as though my eyes would explode from the pressure. My throat swelled shut, and I could no longer breathe. I fell to my knees in a helpless panic, just like the others. I awoke in the same place I had fallen. The others were here too. I stood up and looked at my body. My left arm was now a tentacle. I beamed in pride as I examined it. It was made in the image of the Old One. We started our walk back towards the city. Some of us slogging around, leaving behind a trail of slime. All glory to the Old One. Record 3. There was never a fighting chance. February 10, 2025. The West Coast was lost completely. Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, wiped out in under a week. The survivors turned into hellish zealots. It was through these turned people that we learned its name. Vulthka, the Old One. We have been forced to fall back as far as El Paso, Texas. The city has been reinforced and turned into a military fortress. Today's briefing gave us some hope of a way to fight back. We were told that the massive tentacles have only made contact on population centers after the blood vine had taken over. If we could stop the spread of the vine, maybe we could stop this thing. February 13, 2025. The new weapons arrived today. It's the first time morale has been high since the total annihilation of the West. Herbicide bombs, incendiary rounds and payloads, flamethrowers, thermite. We felt a spark of hope. February 14, 2025. We were attacked today. The morale and good cheer from yesterday is long gone. Swarmed by thousands of them, tentacled horrors poured in from nearly every direction. Thermite and flamethrowers were as effective against flesh as they were against vine. Despite their numbers, they never had a chance to overtake our position. The air has been filled with the smell of burnt flesh all day. It's gut-wrenching. But these things refuse to go down with bullets. It's like they don't feel pain. I've killed too many to count. The guilt of killing other humans, even if they are changed, is getting to me. February 17, 2025. Blood vine started to sprout from the slaughter field. The last couple of days has been filled with spraying herbicides and burning vine. I no longer think they are meant to kill us. They were sent as seeds. The choppers overhead are dropping herbicide bombs everywhere for miles in every direction. It's been effective so far. The growth of the vine has been stunted. Something else is wrong though. I keep seeing the other troops flinch for no reason. Like they see something out of the corner of their eye. February 21st, 2025. It's been oddly quiet. The vine had stopped growing. Morale is up again. We stopped the assault of a literal deity. The massive shadow stretching over the sky still show no sign of retreat. I look at him and wonder why it doesn't just encase the planet and end us all. Things have become stranger around here. I see men staring off at nothing. I saw Lieutenant Guttersby step to the edge of camp to urinate, only to stare at nothing and reach out, trying to grab something invisible. He walks back and was acting normal, as if nothing had happened. February 23, 2025. It's getting worse. Other men are starting to notice now. Everyone is nervous, watching everyone else. Private Mason lost his mind. He ran through camp naked, screaming that nothing mattered, and then took the pistol out of another soldier's holster and shot himself in the head. No one has seen Lieutenant Guttersby since yesterday. Weapons are now on strict lockdown, not allowed out unless there is a fight. Because of the disappearance of Lieutenant Guttersby, a hit count was called. Nearly 20 men are unaccounted for. May 2nd, 2025. Things have gone from bad to worse. Where to start? Lieutenant Guttersby was found just outside of camp. He had gone completely insane. They found him crouched down, eating his own hands. By the time they got to him, he had no fingers on his left hand and had just started in on his right. Schizophrenia and hallucinations seemed to be running rampant through camp. Yesterday, an officer shot one of his corporals because he thought he was a Voltka zealot. Admiral Bennett, the commander officer overseeing this entire operation, called an all-hands meeting where he climbed the highest guard tower and just jumped off in front of everyone, leaving Rear Admiral Sampson in charge. Organization has gone to shit. Everyone fears each other. Worst of all, the vine started to grow in the slaughter field again. May 3rd, 2025. The vine was a blessing in disguise. We have purpose again and focus on things other than the strange behavior spreading through camp. A new tent had to be erected to treat those with spontaneous mental illness. I used treat liberally. It was more of a prison for those who had become a danger to us and themselves. Around midday, we found out why the vine had started to grow again. Someone called out to look at the sky to the west. The clouds were splitting, and a tentacle had begun its descent. I had heard the stories, but nothing could prepare me for the sheer size of this thing. It was as if a tree trunk miles in circumference was falling from the sky. We were called back into the confines of camp to reinforce the stronghold, while assembling a cartridge launcher for herbicide and incendiary bombs. The rumbles of the impact hit us. we were informed that Tucson, Arizona had been lost. May 5th, 2025. We are losing men to mental issues at an alarming pace. We don't have the room to hold them anymore. They are simply being put in a metal cage to fend for themselves. They are killing themselves and each other in there, and we don't have the manpower anymore to stop them. A stealth bomber flew overhead today, leaving a trail of red and blue over the installation. A vain attempt to raise morale. It dropped a nuke on the thick tentacle that now smeared the horizon. We were told not to look at the flesh if we valued our eyesight. Around the time of detonation, the men in the holding pen wailed in unison. It took hours for the mushroom cloud to clear enough for us to see the results. A loud cheer rang out through the camp. A large chunk of the monstrous mass of muscle was gone, obliterated by the bomb. We could hurt this thing. We could win. March 10th, 2025. Things are looking better. The tentacle over Tucson was bumped over and over until it was disconnected from the world. It had reeled back into the sky. Tucson may never come back, but we had at least avenged its people. The men in the holding pen were starting to become lucid again. Some were being let out under supervision. Rumors were going around that other countries were having success as well. The spread of the vine had been stopped and even pushed back, unable to grow in the toxic ground. Word came that similar bombing campaigns would be happening soon to the other tentacles as well. The zealots had retreated deeper into their own territory. Stories came in that further north had been much worse off than us. But with the defeat of a tentacle, the enemy's forces had weakened considerably. Date unknown. This morning, I awoke to loud screaming, followed by the sounds of wet crunching. I tried to sit up, but found it difficult. I looked at my body to find it thin, my muscles atrophied almost to bone. The air in my tent was thick with red fog. It was darker than it should be at 8 a.m. I scratched my face, only to find a long beard. What was happening? I used my rifle as support to stand up, unable to do so on my own. When I stepped out of my tent, I found everything covered in blood vine. The sky was red, and there were no other soldiers inside. Dried, lifeless husks in military uniform littered the ground around me. I hopped through the camp, trying to figure out what happened. I reached the wall and looked over the vine-covered slaughter field. In the distance, I could see the tentacle over Tucson climbing into the sky beyond the horizon. Didn't we destroy that? I could find no sign on the pen we had set up for the crazies. I will try to convey what I believe happened after some exploration of camp. I found the entire command chain dead in similar fashion in their seats in the war room. Dried husks with empty eye sockets. Even Admiral Bennett was among the dead. We never had a chance. I was shown a vision of hope, for the sole purpose of taking it away. This is my last entry. As I record this, I can see a tentacle descending from the heavens, directly onto my position. Claire? Came the man's voice. I had to struggle to come back to reality. I let go of the crystal, releasing it to the customer. Him and his girlfriend had confused looks on their faces. Oh, I'm sorry. This piece has been with the family since we opened. I'm just a little sad to see it go. I am sure it will find better use in your home than wasting away on these shelves though. You have a good day now. I hurried to the back room. The sights and emotions of all that I had seen still swimming in my vision. I sat down and cried, unable to process. the enormity of it all.